Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Welcome back to my channel, the best place on the internet for Pathfinder lore and history. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe, and if there's anything you'd like to know about in particular, let me know in the comments below. So, this is my last video of 2024, and I'm doing something slightly different here from what I normally do. Normally I post all my videos 4 weeks early to my Mythwatchers Club membership, which you can join right here on YouTube, and to my Patreon, which you can join at patreon.com/mythkeeper. But this time, I'm doing a simul post. I'm posting this to my public channel and to my club members all at the same time. This basically because I just want this timing to be right. I'm publishing this video at the very end of 2024. I want everyone to get this at the same time, because this video is a revisit of my first ever video. Think of it as a remaster or remix. It's the full history of the Inner Sea region. I've been doing Pathfinder lore on YouTube now for over 2 years. In the course of writing these videos, I have learned a lot, and the audio was bad on my first ever video, but also I realized in doing all of the region deep dives that I've picked up some lore that is not immediately obvious, but is pretty impactful in terms of the overall Inner Sea history. And so I knew that I wanted to redo this and re-emphasize some of the things and make sure that I provided the most robust guide to Inner Sea history anywhere on the internet. Really, in one video, I've tried to capture as much as possible while still keeping it reasonably high level so you can get through it in a single watching. This is the end of the year, and going into next year, we have the event of the death of the war god Gorham and God's Reign, which will affect the Pathfinder universe, I imagine, for years to come. And I wanted to make sure that in my video, I really brought literally everything up to speed to the end of year 2024. So that's what this video is. I include not just all the changes that came in first edition, but I also touch on some of the changes that came as a result of second edition events as well, right up to this year. So this will get you as current as you can be on the history of the Inner Sea. I hope you all enjoy it, and I'll see you next year.
The Age of Creation. There are many conflicting creation myths about the origins of creation itself, of the gods of mortal kind, and of the world of Golarion. The dwarves speak of how Torag forged the world on his mighty anvil, striking it again and again until it took the shape he desired. Perhaps the most interesting accounting of the origin of things, though, can be found in a trilogy of books originating in the outer planes of the Great Beyond, compiled by the angel Tabris, also sometimes called Chronicler, whose work ultimately led to his exile from the heavens. These were the Chronicles of the Righteous, which detailed the origins of the heavenly afterlives, the Book of the Damned, which detailed the history of the Hells, and the Concordance of Rivals, which took a look at the places that lay somewhere between these two extremes. According to this source, in the beginning of time, everything was churning chaos, an endless and terribly chaotic tidal ocean known as the Maelstrom, above which roared a violent churning sky called the astral plane. There was something else too, though, even at the beginning of time, a hidden remnant of the universe that had come before. To hear the Proteans tell it, who were the first beings to emerge in the Maelstrom, they were the oldest and most ancient entities in the Great Beyond. But they were not alone, or at least, they were not alone for long. Even as the Proteans emerged in the Maelstrom, their counterparts, the Eons, emerged in the astral plane. For many long ages, the Eons observed how the Proteans destroyed any instance of order that occurred in the Maelstrom. One place the Proteans did not discover, however, was a small pocket dimension that lay at the border of the astral plane in the Maelstrom. The Eons, however, did discover it, and conferred with the entity within, who back then was simply referred to as the Survivor. A more detailed description of this encounter can be found in my religion video guide to the Eons. For our purposes here, we need only know that the Survivor would come to be known as Pharasma, and her spindle would become the Spire, with a plateau near its peak known as the Boneyard, which she made her divine domain. The Book of the Damned and Concordance of Rivals claim that the first gods were born spontaneously from the mysterious source of life known as the Seal, which Pharasma had protected in her spire. The first gods began as formless motes of energy. Then the Seal birthed other lesser motes, and the first gods became self-aware. The Eons had been born of these lesser motes. and they quickly realized that the first among them, the monad, had been therefore created by her, inadvertently at first, but implicitly understanding her mission. Reality needed protection, and their first challenge was overcoming the zealous guardians of the primordial chaos, the Proteans. Opportunity first came when the Proteans began exploring the outer rifts, and encountered the Qliphoths. The war between the two forces of chaos distracted the Proteans, and the Aeons set to work. At the base of Pharasma's spire they labored. This vast blank field of rock and mineral they called Axis, and they imbued it with some of the spirit of the monad, the first Aeon. This was the germination of a new entity, which would come to be known as the God-Mind, but at first it lay dormant. It required other things in place before it could grow. This change was coming. Two of the first gods, Ehis and Asmodeus, considered two brothers among the divinities, were the first to grant autonomy to the creations they worked on within the seal, the first souls of the living, and the foundation of the River of Souls was created. As the mortal creations of the gods built their first societies and civilizations, this was the trigger that Axis needed. With new direction, the rocky wasteland began reshaping itself, creating homes, raising edifices, and extending boulevards countless miles in every direction. From the astral plane, a legion of Aeons stood in the waiting. Using the forms of the earliest mortals, these Aeons became the first Axiomites, and they settled quickly into the city, shoring up its defenses, knowing full well that the Protean retaliation would be swift and terrible. The incursion of order into the outer sphere was a terrible violation of everything the Proteans believed in. As soon as the Proteans sensed the presence of the great city erecting its walls around the threefold pillars of the God-Mind, they dispatched a trio of elder Proteans to approach Axis, demanding it cease its expansion and cede itself back to the primal chaos. This was only the beginning of the war in heaven. While the forces of order and chaos first waged war upon each other, so too did the actions of Ehis and Asmodeus create a schism among the gods. Asmodeus felt betrayed by Ehis, who chose to bestow upon the first mortals the gift of free will, without consulting his brother. According to the Book of the Damned, Asmodeus, devastated by his brother's act, showed Ehis the chaos and destruction that he had sowed. But also according to this book, the angel Sarenrae came to Ehis, and showed him that great good could come from mortals' freedom, and other gods supported him. Ehis defended the right of mortals to choose their own destiny, with Sarenrae as his right hand. War soon broke out between those who supported Ehis and those who supported Asmodeus. So it was that finally on a distant world, Ehis and Asmodeus met for the last time on the field of battle. Asmodeus is said to have offered his hand in brotherhood, and then performed the first act of treachery, murdering Ehis with a great spear. In a last act of sympathy for his brother, Asmodeus allowed Ehis's dream of freedom to stand, but then he created hell as a monument to the old ways of absolute merciless order and as a warning of what he would one day make anew. The first war in heaven ended with a kind of balance being found between the forces of order and chaos and the forces of light and darkness. Pharasma's divine domain in the Boneyard became the fulcrum around which the entirety of the great beyond found its balance. After the first war, Pharasma is said to have judged the soul of Ehis, and thus began her eternal vigil and duty over the souls of the dead, shepherding them to their afterlives. The first war in heaven was over, but the second war in heaven was only a few centuries away, a brief instant by the reckoning of the eons of old. To understand the second war, one must first know that as mortal life had begun, the eldest of all the Qliphoths, Rovagug, also called the Rough Beast, had gnawed its way out of the deepest outer rifts, jumped across the astral plane, and invaded the nascent material universe. He consumed 7 planets before he was discovered, and an alliance of deities pushed him back into the outer rifts. After Asmodeus killed Ehis, Rovagug snuck into the universe again, and he is said to have fed on the world where Ehis himself had been murdered. As its inhabitants died in agony, Rovagug revelled in the taste, and he proceeded to destroy countless worlds after this. Then, fueled by the death of 1,000 worlds, he turned his attention to the great beyond. He rampaged through Axis in the greatest calamity that ever befell the Eternal City, laying waste to many districts which have never recovered even to this day. Abruptly, Rovagug turned his attention away from Axis, and his dark divine power began to invade 3 different mortal worlds at once, each located in a different galaxy and in a different part of the material universe. The planet Galarian, the planet Andropha, and the planet Earth, thus signifying that all 3 of these worlds possess some kind of cosmic consequence for the universe. Whatever Rovagug's purpose might have been, Sarenrae decided that Rovagug would have to be defeated, and gathered under her banner an unlikely collection of gods. the most significant of which were herself, the trade god Abadar, the fallen god Asmodeus, seductive Calistria, wise Desna, Shaelin's clever brother Dubral, the war god Gorum, the first goddess Pharasma, and the forge god Torag, along with dozens of other gods as well. Such was Rovagug's power that it required the combined might of all these gods to defeat him. Many gods died in this battle, but their names have been forgotten. Certainly the gods who sided with the rough beast will never be remembered. The gods fought these avatars of Rovagug on all three of these worlds, Earth, Androffa, and Golarion. It soon became all too clear that Rovagug had become too powerful an entity to destroy outright, so the gods came together with a plan. It began with Torag and Gorum, toiling diligently together to forge the shell of the Dead Vault, an indestructible extra-dimensional prison which Pharasma imbued with potent wards against escape. The god Abadar then collaborated with Asmodeus to craft a master key, bound by their combined magics, to make it the only mechanism that could be used to move into or out of the Dead Vault. Their prison complete, Calistria and Desna then lured Rovagug to a special designated spot on Golarion and distracted him. Sarenrae then sliced open a rift near the windswept wastes on the continent of Casmarin, sending Rovagug stumbling into the Dead Vault. Shaelin's brother, Dubral, impaled him with special lances, the Star Towers of his own design, that blocked a measure of his divine power, and the Archdevil Asmodeus turned the key that he and Abadar had constructed to seal him into the Dead Vault for all eternity. Sarenrae then repaired the rift, leaving behind a smooth scar, and instructing her followers ever after to avoid it. Rovagug's rampage through the material universe had lasting consequences. Collectively, the surviving gods agreed that direct interference with mortals could only harm creation. Since that time, direct apparition of deities on the mortal universe have become a relative rarity, as the gods agreed to rely on their mortal worshippers to accomplish their goals in the material universe. Though even the darkest of gods have largely abided by this resolution, it is an imperfect solution, and the gods have continued to affect the affairs of the universe. It is not clear how many of these events are apocryphal or metaphorical, and how many actually happened, but if we leave the realm of cosmic lore behind and focus on the world of Golarion, it is clear that during the Age of Creation, the world of Golarion itself existed for millennia in a primeval pre-human state. Yet apart from the interference of the gods, Golarion saw other major events during the Age of Creation. One notable event that Golarion experienced before the end of the Age of Creation was a kind of elemental war between earth and sea. From an alien world whose name has been lost to time came the aquatic species called the Algolthu. They came to Golarion and various other worlds across the universe by way of magical gates to escape the destruction of their own world, the end of which was largely caused by themselves. At the same time, there came from the elemental plane of Earth insectile creatures called Zeomorns, which had come to Golarion and other worlds by similar extra-dimensional gateways to find a solution to a prophecy of impending doom that threatened their species. In the pursuit of this goal, the Zeomorns began to hollow out the world of Golarion, creating massive underground biomes called the Orvian Vaults. Eventually, the Algolthu and the Zeomorns would come into conflict with each other, waging a millennia-long war in the deepest places of Golarion. More details on this war of sea and earth can be found in my Algolthu creature feature video and my Zeomorn creature feature video, both up on the channel. Eventually, the war proved too costly for the Zeomorns, who fled from the world of Golarion altogether, and though the Algolthu had technically won the war, it proved enormously costly for their kind as well, and they spent such a great deal of time in recovery that in the subsequent age, the Age of Serpents, other powers would rise to prominence in the world. The Age of Serpents. The Age of Serpents doesn't have an exact start date, but we can assume it begins sometime around the year minus 12,000, or around 20,000 years ago. The Age of Serpents is so named because a species of underground-dwelling serpent folk rose to prominence, claiming many of the realms left behind by the fleeing Zeomorns. Eventually in this period, the serpent folk emerged onto the surface of the world, conquering vast stretches of territory. They emerged from three principal locations in the Inner Sea region: in the Mobad Lay, in the lands that would one day become Varissia, in the Candlestone Caverns, in the land that would one day become Andoran, and above their southern capital of Ilmeria, a place the Aslanti would later name Savanth Yi in the Mwangi Expanse. The dominion of the Serpent Folk was not unchallenged in the Age of Serpents. In the western Mwangi Expanse, the Golgan Empire emerged, around the same time the Serpent Folk began to breach the surface. The Golgan were Cyclopes, and their capital city, Zarban, was located about where the Eye of Abandago is located today. Also around this time, the elves first came to Golarion. The elves were a sophisticated people, even in the ancient world, and they came to Golarion by way of special waygates called the Ayudara. The elves would construct various gates across the inner sea region, but generally favoring woodlands and forests. Their greatest center of power stretched across the Ferrani forest, encompassing the Wildwood, the northern and southern Himbrian forests, and extending as far east as the Borewood. Other centers of elven power to emerge in this time also included the Mirani forest in Varissia and the western Wangi expanse, where the rainforest met the Megumo plains. A third and final power began to emerge in the Age of Serpents, and that was humanity. In Avestan, the most widespread and influential of these peoples were the Kelids, which had spread out across central Avestan, forming a few different unique cultures. More details on the earliest Kelids can be found in my Realm of the Mammoth Lords region deep dive video. Humans were also forming tribal cultures in the Mwangi Expanse and along the coasts of Garand as well. However, the most powerful human empire of all to emerge in this time was on a vast island continent in the Arcadian Ocean, a place called Aslant. Aslant is said to have had a unique heritage. According to some rumors, the reason for Aslant's incredible sophistication, and the power of their sorcerers and scientists in particular, was because the Aslanti people had actually been modified by the Algolthu. According to this narrative, these humans were originally designed as weapons of war by the Algolthu to help defeat the Zeomorns. Once the Zeomorns were finally defeated, though, the Algolthu lacked the means to destroy these engineered humans outright, so instead of doing so, they opted to rule from the shadows, using their telepathic powers to manipulate their leaders and guide their society to serve their own ends. Although these four powers, the Serpent Folk, the Cyclops, the Elves, and the Aslanti, dominate the legends that date back to the Age of Serpents, there were other creatures making forays into Golarion at the time, in pockets here and there. One notable example is that the alien creatures called the Callborn constructed the massive hexagonal city of Kaer Maga in Varissia around this time. In any case, as the Serpent Folk Empire continued to grow in power and influence over the surface world, an unlikely alliance came together between the humans of Aslant, the elves of the various woodland realms, and the Cyclops of the Golgan Empire, and collectively they struck at all the power centers of the Serpent Folk. The last great Serpent Folk city to fall was Illyria in the Mwangi Expanse. Here the Aslanti hero Savith is said to have slain the avatar of the Serpent Folk god Idursius. After this victory, the Aslanti constructed their own city here, called Savanthi, and the Age of Serpents had officially ended. The Age of Legend. What followed was the Age of Legend, which would last roughly from -7000 to -5293. The most significant feature of the Age of Legend is the continued rise in power and influence of the Empire of Aslant, the most powerful human civilization of its era. It was, however, not the only culture to flourish in this time period. In this period, the elves continued to expand their footprint across Golarion, extending the Ayudara network, and particularly building the observatory at the Mordant Spire, settling the Estrovian forest in Sarkoris, the Ebonwall forest in Ustalav, and the Fangwood forest in Nirmathis, as well as continuing their expansion across the Mwangi Expanse. Other human civilizations also began to crop up. The Kelids continued to dominate the lands of central Avestan. In the Palakar forest in particular, the Macready blade culture showed that the Kelids had truly mastered the art of weaponcraft, even in these early days. On the western coast of Avestan, the Nidalese horse lords acquired renown, even among the Aslanti, for the quality of the horses they bred. On the northeastern coast of Garand, the lost statue builder civilization are now remembered only for the quality and beauty of the soapstone statues they left behind. While humanity and elvendom flourished in the Age of Legend, the Golgan Empire fell into decline. Following their victory over the Serpent Folk, the heart of the Golgan Empire fell to corruption and decadence. Cyclops exiles from this empire traveled east, eventually settling in the islands of Iblidos and forming the southern Coloran Empire. Some of these exiles traveled even further east and then north, crossing the Casman Plains and discovering the Castrovan Sea. Eventually, those exiles would establish the northern Coloran Empire in the lands that would one day become Iobaria. More detail on the Coloran Cyclops can be found in my Iblidos and Northeast Avestan region deep dive videos. A major development to occur among the Aslanti civilization was the exiling of the wizard Zin, an event which is believed to have occurred around -6530. He and his followers left the distant continent and traveled to northwestern Avestan to establish a new realm called Thassalon in the area now known as Varissia. In doing so, they brought advanced civilization to the people who lived there, known today as the Shoanti and the Varissians. As the size of his nation grew, Zin divided Thassalon into 7 fiefdoms, and entrusted his advisors to rule them in his stead. Each of these lords specialized in a different school of magic, and was guided by one of the Aslante's 7 virtues of rule. They became known as the Rune Lords. As Zin's personal influence over the nation waned, his ideals were also pushed to the wayside, making way for the villainy of the sinful Rune Lords, who would in time gain even more power than Zin had himself, but did so on the backs of the people of Thassalon. Eventually the Rune Lords deposed Zin, declaring themselves the monarchs of the 7 realms of Thassalon. Under their leadership, the nation fell into decadence and cruelty for hundreds of years. They enslaved giants to create cyclopean cities and monuments to themselves, and bled the people dry to fill their coffers. Towards the end of the Age of Legend, in the tumultuous final decades before the Earthfall Cataclysm, a man named Aradin was born in the Empire of Aslant. He was a follower of Akavna, a moon goddess, and Amaznan, a god of magic. According to legends, he was an unrivaled blacksmith, and as Aslant's premier swordmaker, his most famous creation during this time was the Aslanti Diamond, a clear, jewel-bladed sword intended to be the weapon of the next Aslanti emperor. In the conducting of his work, he became a close advisor to the emperor, and he was the first to begin to suspect that the fate of Aslant was being secretly controlled by the Veiled Masters, the lords of the nefarious aquatic Algolthu species. The Algolthu, foreseeing that Aradin possessed the intelligence and leadership qualities that might expose their plots, developed a radical solution. They contacted allies of theirs across the stars and used their collective powers to push a meteorite with a hardened starstone core off its path, to strike Golarion and eradicate humanity forever. They decided they would hibernate in the deepest parts of the ocean and emerge to retake the world when life had returned. However, their plan did not go as intended. Akavna, the goddess of the moon, sacrificed herself to slow the meteorite. The projectile splintered in the upper atmosphere and rained down in fiery chunks across the inner sea region, devastating the land and bringing about the utter ruin of the Empire of Aslant. Against all odds, though, Aradin himself survived, and thanks to his mastery of magic, he would go on to live for thousands of years, helping to bring back civilization to the world he had inadvertently devastated. The Age of Darkness. The Earthfall Cataclysm brought about an end to the Age of Legend, and ushered in the Age of Darkness. Aslant was destroyed, Thassalon was destroyed. Although many of Thassalon's rune lords had such powerful magic, they managed to find ways of surviving the apocalypse, and much like the Algolthu, they intended to return many thousands of years later, after the devastation had subsided. The Khelids, Varisians, Shoanti, and Garundi peoples survived only out of sheer perseverance. Many took to the tunnels of the Darklands to seek shelter from the Ashfalls. The elves fled Golarion by way of the Ayudara, but in a few specific cases, some elves remained behind. The elves of the Mirani forest, for example, fled deep underground, becoming the Aindalar, or Cavern Elves. The elves of the Mwangi Expanse became the Mualajay, the Jungle Elves, and they remained behind to prevent the evil dragon god Dahak from conquering the world during its descent into the Age of Darkness. They would eventually divide into 3 kindreds, the Ekujay, the Kalajay, and the Alajay. The details of these kindreds and their respective civilizations can be found in my Mwangi Expanse deep dive video series. Finally, all that remained of the old Cyclops empires of Gul'gan and Coloran were also destroyed. Essentially, all vestiges of the old world were eradicated, and civilization would have to re-emerge anew. The physical shape of Golarion was also irrevocably changed. The river that ran from Qadira to the Arcadian Ocean widened, becoming the Inner Sea as we know it today, permanently separating Avestan and Garand. The western shelf of Garand sank beneath the sea, forming the Abendego Gulf. The continent of Aslant was reduced to an archipelago of small, storm-racked islands. After this, for 1,000 years in the Inner Sea region, clouds of ash blotted out the light of the sun, and the world was covered in darkness. It was a terrible and devastating time for humanity, and much that they had once known was lost forever. However, as old powers waned, new powers arose in this darkened world. In the central Mwangi Expanse, the apefolk called the Charaka came to be united under a warlord known as the Gorilla King, an avatar of the savage demon god Angazan. Also in the Mwangi Expanse, a dark and sinister civilization called Erd emerged, embracing black magic and sinister alliances. Similarly, the Horse Lords of Nidal turned to the worship of Zon Kuthon, the corrupt reincarnation of the god Dubral that had once helped defeat Rovagug in the Age of Creation. Nidal would become a nightmare realm dedicated to his profane worship, and it endures even to this day. And deep underground, the shaking of the earth from the impact of the meteorite was seen as a sign by a deep-dwelling people that their time had come. According to their ancient prophecies, their chief god Torag would signal them when it was time to undergo a great exodus, which they call the quest for the sky. These people were the dwarves. Born deep underground, these stocky peoples were master craftsmen and resilient warriors. Their upwards exodus brought them into conflict with the orc realms of the Upper Darklands. In -5102, orcs were pushed out of their lands, and were forced therefore to emerge onto the surface of the world. The greatest concentration of orcs emerged from the caves along the Mindspin Mountains, the Menador Mountains, and the Five Kings Mountains. This brought them immediately into conflict with the Khelids of central Avestan. The orcs, with their superior night vision, had the advantage over the humans of these lands, who required light to see and fight properly. Before long, the orcs had conquered most of the lands between the various mountains and Lake Incarthen. Not every orc emergence, though, had led immediately to violence with the local surface folk. In the Mwangi Expanse, in the southern Napsen range, the orcs encountered the Kalajay elves, who here were battling the dark forces of Urd and the Gorilla King. These orcs, which would come to be known as the Matangi or Jungle Orcs, would become fierce allies of the elves, forming a kingdom for themselves in the western Mwangi Expanse known as the Nine Walls. The dwarves followed the orcs. In Avestan, a powerful king named Targic had united all the dwarves under a single banner, and they first breached the surface in -4987, close to where the dwarven capital city of Highhelm can still be found to this day. King Targic allied with the Palakari Khelids of the lands that would one day become Druma, and began a slow but steady war with the orcs that would ultimately lead to his people conquering all the mountain lands that the orcs had claimed. Those humans that had helped them in their war were incorporated into the growing dwarven empire, an empire called Targath. The empire extended above ground as it did below ground, and its most impressive cities were called the Sky Citadels, enormous, metropolis-sized dwarven fortresses to serve as the heart of their flourishing empires. The heartland of Targath was in Avestan. Its easternmost sky citadel was Kravenkus in the World's Edge Mountains. Traveling westwards and northwards, the dwarves established a major settlement called Mistholm in the Fog Peaks, and of course their greatest sky citadel of all, the capital of their empire, was Highhelm in the Central Mountains. The realm continued across the Menador Mountains and up the Mindspin Mountains. Here they built two mighty sky citadels, Kragadan and Yanderhof. In the lowlands between the Mindspin Mountains and the Tusk Mountains, they built a particularly impressive sky citadel to commemorate their great victory over the orcs here, the sky citadel of Kol Dukar. Further north along the Tusk Mountains, the dwarves built their northernmost sky citadel called Yormer Dun. Not every dwarf emergence was connected to the great central dwarven empire of Targath. Other groups of dwarves found their own paths to the surface, sometimes building new and unique cultures of their own. In northeastern Avestan, the Golushkin dwarves established Hydelv in the Golushkin Mountains. In the Zo Mountains of Kadira, the Paraheen dwarves emerged. In the eastern barrier wall mountains of Garand, on the north side of the range, came the Pamet dwarves of Osirian, and on the south side of the range came the now extinct Hammerfall dwarves of Katapesh. From the Napsun Mountains of western Garand came the Vahir dwarves of Rahadum. South of this, in the Turwa Mountains of the western Mwangi Expanse, there came the Mbeke dwarf culture, who established a mighty sky citadel of their own, one of the two grandest dwarven cities in all of Garand, called Cloudspire. On the other side of Garand, two more groups of dwarves reached the surface here in the Shattered Range. The Taralu dwarves, who established the old council hold in the northern stretch of the Shattered Range, and the Donguni dwarves, who established Garand's other mighty sky citadel, Dongan Hold, close to the Alkan Falls, where the high Ustradi hilllands overlook the eastern desert. For the remaining 700 years of the Age of Darkness, the dwarves could be considered the largest and most prominent culture of the Inner Sea. One final curious event closes out my summary of the Age of Darkness. In -4363, an event occurred in the lands that are now called Numeria, called the Reign of Stars. A starship called the Divinity, from the distant world of Androffa, another anchor world once besieged by the rough beast Rovagug as described in my Age of Creation summary, broke apart above Numeria. The greatest intact piece of the starship would crash at a location that would come to be known by the local Khelids as the Silver Mount. In time, the arrival of this starship would create a distinct and unique Khelid culture around this area, laying the foundations for the emergence of Numeria as a nation. Relatedly, around this time is when we can say the great Khelid ethnic split had fully occurred. North of Numeria, the Khelids settled in their lands and became the Sarkorian Khelids. West of the Sarkorian steppe, and across the Tusk Mountains, the Yerktiri Kelids would continue to lead nomadic herding lives, and would form the realm of the Mammoth Lords. In the lands that would one day become Druma, the Kelids also settled, and became the Palakari people, while the Kelids south of this land, the lands of modern-day Isger and Andoran, would become the Isgari Kelids. The Kelids of central eastern Avestan, who occupied Ustalav and the River Kingdoms once, do not have a specific name, as they would become a diaspora population in time, but they are most closely related to the Sarkorian peoples of the north. In any case, in minus 4294, the clouds began to part, bringing the light of the sun back into the world, and slowly but surely, humanity began to regain its footing, but also other peoples would come to Golarion and shape its future as well. The Age of Anguish. One of the first major events of the Age of Anguish was the First World Exodus. This occurred in the year minus 4202, when a great calamity befell the First World, and various Fey creatures were forced to flee into the material universe to survive. This first great Fey migration brought with it the gnomes to Golarion, but also other more nefarious entities, such as the Fey of the Court of Ether, who settled beneath the Candlestone Caverns of Andoran as described in my Darklands Deep Dive video. Many gnomes who arrived in Golarion during the First World Exodus were quick to establish close friendships with the dwarves, who were the culturally dominant people of this time. These friendships endure to this day, even though the fickle nature of gnomes is fairly antithetical to the stoic nature of dwarves. The first human empire to emerge in the Age of Anguish was the Jiske Imperium of northwestern Garand. Emerging in the lands that would one day become Rahadum in minus 4120, the Jiske Imperium would eventually stretch to encompass vast areas of southern Cheliax as well. The Jiskins were master artificers, and one significant legacy left behind by the Jiske Imperium was the secret for the construction of immortal automatons, constructs that could house a living human soul, and thus extend human life in a mechanical chassis indefinitely. The Jiske Imperium is described in more detail in my Cheliax region deep dive. Although not really an empire at this time, it's also worth calling out that the arrival of the sun emboldened the nomadic Varisian people of western Avestan. The Varisians built caravan trails that range from the cold northern realm of Southmoor and the Ulfin city of Yol all the way down south to the Mushfens, and east along the Yondabakari River to the ancient and enduring city of Kermaga, and under the protection of the dwarves even beyond this, across the Blood Plains and into the lands that would one day become Ustalav and the Gravelands. Here the Varisians began to openly trade with the Kelids of central Avestan. The Varisians also shared their western realm with another people, the Shoanti, who were most populous in the region of the Corvosan river valleys. Meanwhile, in central Avestan, as a result of their ongoing war with the dwarves, the orcs had been driven back to the most desolate regions of north-central Avestan. One orc warlord known as Belkzen emerged among the orc tribes of the time. His determination, and later his various military successes, rallied thousands of orcs under his banner of a black sun. Belkzen's most significant victory was in minus 3708. In that year, warlord Belkzen laid siege to and eventually overran Koldukar at the Battle of Nine Stones. He renamed the city Urgir, a capital of a new orc empire, and this laid the foundation for the formation of the Hold of Belkzen. Way up north, cut off from the rest of the empire, the sky citadel of Yormir Dun effectively became an independent city-state starting in this time period. The loss of their northern lands was a major blow to the dwarven empire of Tar-Targath, and this was a significant turning point for the dwarves of central Avestan in general, who would enter into a period of decline over the next few millennia, which saw their empire consolidated to the heartland of Avestan. In the east, a grey dwarf or Hringar siege of the sky citadel of Crevenkus, coupled with frost giant conquests in the Fog Peaks, similarly led to both Mistholm and Crevenkus becoming independent city-states as well, cut off from the rest of the empire. The dwarves were not the only people affected by the orc conquests of Belkzen. The Varisian nomads who had travelled east into Ustalav had no choice but to settle there, among the western Kelids, cut off from their homeland by the orc dominion in the west. In time, they would spread out across the length and breadth of this land. Towards the end of the Age of Ashes, a powerful wizard from the Wangi Expanse known as Old Mage Jatembe brought back the secrets of magic to his people. In minus 3504, Jatembe gathered a group of followers who would become known as the 10 Magic Warriors. To show their dedication, the warriors obscured their identities behind golden animal masks. Together, Jatembe and the 10 Magic Warriors explored the ruins of the ancient pre-Earthfall cities of Garand, uncovering many forgotten magical secrets. Later in -3502, after reclaiming many lost secrets, Jatembe founded a center of learning, known as the Magambia, in the town of Nantambu in the Mwangi Expanse. The Magambia has endured all these long millennia, and still exists today, and continues Jatembe's legacy of preserving and passing on magical and cultural knowledge to those who will use it for the betterment of others. More details on Old Mage Jatembe can be found in my various Mwangi Expanse deep dive videos. The Age of Destiny. In -3470, under the guidance of a powerful wizard named Nethys, a man named Pharaoh Asgad I, also often called the First Pharaoh, or Asgad the All-Seeing, established the Empire of Osirian in eastern Garand. This marks the end of the Age of Anguish and the beginning of the Age of Destiny. While some human civilizations had begun to form in the Age of Anguish, the Age of Destiny is better characterized as being the age that ushered in a return to prominence of humanity across the Inner Sea. The Empire of Osirian rapidly expanded, quickly rivaling the power of the Jiska Imperium in the west. In fact, after helping Asgad I defeat the enormous beetle-like spawn of Rovagug, called Ulunat, and founding the Empire of Osirian, the Arch-Wizard Nethys acquired such arcane power as to transcend mortality. Nethys became a god of magic, and the patron god of Osirian, becoming the second human of Galarian, after Irori and Vudra, see my Vudra deep dive video for more details on that, to ascend to godhood. Meanwhile, surrounded by the Jiska Imperium on the west and the growing expansionist Empire of Osirian in the east, the 5 great city-states of the Thuvian Desert united, forming a new polity called the Tekratanen League in -3250. The League initially attempted to remain neutral in the growing conflict between Jiska and Osirian, but eventually had to make the choice about who they would ally with. Ultimately, they would place their bets on forming a strategic alliance with the pharaohs of Osirian, a choice which would have lasting consequence. With its tentative alliance with the Tekratanen League in place, the Empire of Osirian focused on expanding southwards. By the year -3000, the Empire of Osirian had expanded to encompass the lands of the southern reach, building a realm that spread as far south as the Jaja River. In -2556, one of Jatembe's disciples, the Black Heron, united the Shori tribes, a tribe of central Mwangi peoples that had been fighting a protracted war against the servants of the Gorilla King alongside the Kalajay elves and the Matangi orcs. This unification of the Shori tribes led to the emergence of the Shori Empire, which quickly grew to encompass the majority of the Mwangi Expanse, and would in time prove to be the significant challenger to both Jiska and Osirian dominance in Garand. The secret to their supremacy in the region was their mastery of aeromancy magic, which they deployed to build incredible flying cities. As new empires rose to power, older empires began to fade, weakened by raids from nomad tribes, and later attacked by powerful outsiders as a result of their practice of binding genies to their automatons, combined with a lack of a strong eastern trade route, led to the slow decline of the Jiska Imperium. In addition to the economic pressure put on Jiska by its eastern neighbors came their direct intervention as well. Osirian, under the control of the powerful Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues, forming an alliance with the Tekratanen League, helped destabilize the already weakened Jiska Imperium. By -2500, the empire had collapsed completely. With the defeat of the Jiska Imperium, Osirian turned its attention to the Shori Empire. The two great empires saw each other as threats to their respective dominance of the region. In -1452, in a bid to compete with the power of its western rival, Osirian decided to conquer the cities of their erstwhile ally, the Tekratanen League, folding in the lands of modern-day Thuvia into its growing empire. Meanwhile, in southeastern Avestan, another power would emerge. The people of this land, although they did not form any kind of united empire at this time, already thought very highly of themselves, as they were said to be descendants of the ancient Aslanti, who established a small settlement where the city of Opara now stands. These Aslanti survivors intermarried with the local human tribes, whose descendants would later be known as the Taldans, and began trading with the Kelishite tribes to the east. It is in this context that a young man came to Opara named Taldaris, who, according to legend, was raised by lions in the Tandak Plains. Using his tactical brilliance, superior forces, and the aid of a kindly old wizard, who it would turn out was in fact the ancient Aslanti survivor Aradin in disguise, Taldaris would launch a 12-year campaign of conquest beginning in the year -1293 and culminating in -1281. His efforts transformed Opara from a city-state into a fledgling unified nation of city-states. The principalities of Taldaris became the nation of Taldor, with Taldaris crowned as its first emperor. This powerful new human empire would prove to be a great boon to the struggling dwarves of the Sky Citadel of Crevenkus, who benefited greatly from a strategic alliance with Taldor that endures to this day. As the Empire of Taldor emerged on the world stage, the Empire of Osirian entered a period of decline. In the year -1125, a succession crisis caused a young Osirianic prince named Geb to flee from the capital of Sothis to the distant lands of the Southern Reach. In -1108, Prince Geb led a revolution in the southern part of the Empire of Osirian, creating the independent nation of Geb. In -987, an archmage born in Quantium, the capital city of the remaining portion of the Southern Reach that had stayed loyal to Osirian, led a revolution of his own. He established his own realm, the Kingdom of Nex, just north of the Kingdom of Geb. These two nations would famously enter into a devastating war with each other, starting in the year -892. A final blow came to the Empire of Osirian in -842. The city-states of the former Tekratanen League also broke free of the Osirian Empire, forming the independent confederacy of Thuvia. Osirian had become a shadow of its former self. Meanwhile, the war between the two archmages Geb and Nex was intensifying in the south. By -700, the lands between Geb and Nex became a magic-blasted wasteland called the Mana Wastes. The dwarves of Dongenhold sealed their sky city, and journeyed deep beneath the earth to wait out the war. Further west in the Shattered Range Mountains, the Teralu dwarves abandoned the mountains altogether, to adopt as their home the central Mwangi jungle. In -643, the largest spawn of Rovagug to have ever emerged from the pit of Gormuz in central Casmarin reached the Inner Sea, crossing the World's Edge Mountains at the Porthmos Gap. Its path of ruin destroyed the Taldan capital city of Opara, and it then waded across the Inner Sea to ravage the cities of Osirian. Its most significant damage, however, it did to the Shori Empire. In -632, it tore down the Shori capital city of Ko, and it caused another one of the great Shori sky cities, Ijay, to flee the Inner Sea region altogether. Though the beast eventually collapsed into a great fissure somewhere in southern Cheliax, the damage done to the Shori Empire led to a steep decline. The Shori's last sky city, the city of Ulduvai, fell from the sky in -507, marking the end of that empire. More details on this final decline period can be seen in my Mwangi Expanse deep dive videos. Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the Inner Sea region, the first Linorm king of far northwestern Avestan was King Sabjorn Armfang, who slew a Linorm at the mouth of the Rhymeflow River in -624. He used the fame he garnered from this deed to declare himself king, and proclaimed that all future Linorm kings must follow his example, and also slay a Linorm in single combat. Eventually, other individuals would copy the first king's accomplishment, and the killing of Linorms would grow into a tradition that has lasted to this present day. As his fame began to grow, Sabjorn established the settlement of Kalsgard and the kingdom of the Thanelands. By -609, he had conquered all the lands from the Steaming Sea to the Glacier Lake. After his death, his empire splintered into various kingdoms, each ruled by a different Linorm king. This also began the practice of Vikingur, or sea raiding, of the southern lands. In -317, Ulfin longships reached a Taldan port, and half of their crew remained behind to serve as bodyguards for the Taldan Empire in exchange for a promise of riches upon their return to their own lands. Thus began the tradition of the Emperor's Ulfin Guard. In -308, the great southern Mwangi city-state of Mazali was founded by warrior monarchs who claimed descent from the sun god Chohar. Mazali would swiftly grow to be the most powerful and influential human Mwangi polity outside of Nantambu since the fall of the Old Shori Empire. Then in the year -43, the incredibly powerful Padishah Empire of Kalesh, which had conquered much of the southern Casmarin, conquered the lands south of Taldor, establishing its westernmost satrapy, the satrapy of Kadira. More details on this powerful Casman Empire can be found in my Kadira region deep dive video. In the year -5, there occurred a second unification of the Linorm kingdoms at the hands of High King Olaf Hagensborg, whose new empire stretched almost all the way to the Tusk Mountains in the east. Like his predecessor, his unification lasted only as long as he did, before the Linorm kingdoms once again divided into warring states. The Age of Enthronement. Finally we reached the year 1, in which the mortal Aradin discovered the Starstone, the heart of the meteorite that had once shattered the world, and in raising it from the seafloor became a living god, the first of a group of gods called the Ascended, who have each attained godhood by passing the test of the Starstone. With his newfound power, Aradin created a new island in the center of the Inner Sea and built a capital city there called Absalom. The founding of Absalom in the year 1 marks the beginning of the Age of Enthronement and the end of the Age of Destiny. More details on Absalom and its early history can be seen in my Absalom region deep dive. While Aradin himself focused on building out his new kingdom of Absalom, the Empire of Taldor became emboldened by the presence of the living god so close to them. The Empire adopted the Aradinite faith as the official faith of the Empire, and they took it upon themselves to spread their faith and their empire across Avestan. After all, it had been Aradin himself who had guided Taldaris into founding the Taldan Empire to begin with. Their expansion kicked off properly in the year 37, in what came to be known as the First Great Army of Exploration. There would be 7 more after this. The First Army, led by the famous General Porthmos, expanded the empire northwards and charted the Sellen River as far as Seven Arches. The rich and fertile river valleys of the land that would one day become known as the River Kingdoms were considered extremely valuable to the Taldans, who had a great need of food across the empire. Meanwhile, further south, in the year 253, the nation of Nex annexed Jalmaray Island off the coast of Garand, in the Archmage's continued bid to acquire more power and outmatch his rival to the south. As he continued to try to expand his power, Nex also helped fuel the growth of the central Mwangi city-state of Kibwe, which had been built over the remains of a long-lost and much older city. Back north, Taldor's second army of exploration built upon the successes of the first, and explored the regions north of Lake Carthan in 499, making it all the way to the Orcs of the Hold of Belkzen. Some efforts were made to explore portions of Numeria, but they made little progress due to hostile locals and dwindling supplies. In the year 563, the Archmage Nex gifted the island of Jalmaray to the Maharaja Kibben Sald of Vudra, and it has for most of its history remained a Vudran colony even to this day. Then, suddenly, in the year 576, there was a decisive battle in the long-standing Geb-Nex War. Geb launched an attack on Quantium, covering Nex's capital in a lethal fog, which killed thousands of its citizens. The Archmage Nex fled into a hidden demiplane, and has not been seen since. At this point, for reasons I cover in more detail in my Geb region deep dive video, the Archmage Geb tried to kill himself after the war ended, but his spirit endured as a ghost, ever after known as Ghost King Geb. Meanwhile, since Nex's disappearance, the nation of Nex has been ruled by the Council of Three, an alliance of 3 powerful and nearly immortal wizard lords. In the year 752, the Linorm kingdoms of the far north expanded their holdings. They did not pursue a bloody conquest eastwards across the realm of the Mammoth Lords, nor did they move southwards into the Varisian wilds. Instead, they went over the crown of the world, conquering the land that would become known as Iobaria, located in the far northeastern corner of the Inner Sea map. A closer look at the realm can be seen in my Northeast Avestan region deep dive video. In 837, a Kelid child named Tarbafon was born in the mountains of Taldan-occupied Virlik. He grew up on the shores of Lake Carthan and studied necromancy. In 861, he conquered the city of Kestrelon on Entepper Island, at the center of the lake. He renamed the city Zin-Grifar and gave the island the name it still holds today, the Isle of Terror. Tarbafon acquired greater power still when he claimed the cenotaph in 880, an ancient Thessalonian monument and the reported resting place of Rune Lord Zutha, the Rune Lord of Gluttony. After claiming this power, he quickly conquered the Orc lands of Belkzen and the Taldan lands of modern-day Ustalav. In 896, the living god Aradin, who had raised the city of Absalom, fought and slew the Whispering Tyrant in the Isle of Terror. This would be one of the last times Aradin spent an extended period of time in the mortal world. After this, Aradin largely abandoned Galarian, to spend more and more time focused on matters related to the divine domain he had constructed for himself in the city of Axis, the eternal city of the Outer Plains. With the tyrant's death, the Orcs quickly reclaimed the lands of Belkzen. Taldor, however, did not immediately reclaim the lands of modern-day Ustalav. These lands instead became contested, fought over by Orcs, Kelids, Varisians, remaining Taldans, and even the surviving legions of Tarbafon's risen dead. The Taldan Empire had effectively been cut off at the West Sellen River. In the year 905, Iobar, son of Kiel, conquered all the lands from the Castervan Sea to the Lake of Mists and Veils, creating a new and independent nation of Iobaria. Following this, as covered in more detail in my Northeast Avestan video, a kind of soft settlement began to occur across the Lake of Mists and Veils, eventually giving rise to the kingdoms of Mendev, Rossland, and Issia. In 1054, a Kolo, or Knoll matriarch named Hungry Bones, unified the knolls of the fields of Jaja to the south of Geb, creating the first real Kolo kingdom. The Kolo would remain unified for another 60 years until her death, after which the kingdom would splinter away into various warring tribes and fiefdoms. Although this may not seem immediately connected to the affairs of the Inner Sea, it's worth calling out that in 1121 the god Aradin named a divine herald, or first servant. The herald he named was an emissary angel, or Tabelia angel, named Erasni. Before her post-mortal life as an angel, Erasni had once been a living human, and a travelling companion of Aradin's when he too was still mortal. In the year 1140, the alchemist Articus Quirin of Thuvia first formulated the Sun Orchid Elixir. This special elixir grants an incredibly long life, maybe even immortality, and as such it served to bring Thuvia both global fame and also put it at the center of many future power struggles, as various powerful kings and emperors have attempted to get their hands on this rare power. In the year 1300, the Tianmin explorer Amaterasu Agenhei charted a path over the crown of the world, connecting the Linorm kingdoms and the northern reaches of Tianxia. Although initially the path would not see much use, over time this would create a vital bridge between these two remote continents. These connections were further solidified when the Resplendent Phoenix, an enormous junk from the Yixing Empire in central Tianxia, landed in Absalom and began establishing trade relations across the Obari Ocean as well. In the year 1520, Taldor would launch its third great army of exploration. General Corin led the third army into western Avestan, where eventually he would found the city of Corentin in order to secure the passage to and from the Inner Sea. During its tenure, the Third Army of Exploration secured the entire northern coast of the Inner Sea for the Empire of Taldor, making it that nation's greatest expansionist endeavor, and indeed no army of exploration before or after have ever matched its successes. That said, the Third Army did not conquer the lands of Andoran or Isger, except for a narrow, well-fortified strip of land along the southern coast of Andoran, due, in large part, to the savage ferocity of the Isgari Khelids. Not to be outdone by Taldor's western expansion, in 1532 Khadiran agents ousted Pharaoh Menedes XXVI in Osirian, leading to the overthrow of the Pharaonic dynasty. The country was then declared a satrapy of the Kelishite Empire, under satrap Zerbistes I. In 1551, a coordinated force of orcs from Belkzen, and from out of the Darklands, particularly from the breach at Candlestone Caverns in Andoran, performed a coordinated attack on the Dwarven Empire of Tar-Targath. The last vestiges of the old Dwarven Empire collapsed under this violent siege. The major Dwarven holdings and surviving sky citadels became independent from one another. In the Mindspin Mountains, the surviving Dwarven holds were Yanderhof, Kragadan, and the Glimmerhold. In the heart of Tar-Targath, the surviving dwarves separated into 5 separate kingdoms, Tagaret, Grakodan, Gardath, Sagarak, and Dogath, and divided among themselves the colonized human holdings located north of the mountains. Misfortune continued to befall the dwarves after this. In 1600, the Grey Dwarves, or Hringar, conquered the sky citadel of Yormerdun, forcing the few surviving dwarves to flee. In 1683, Taldor waged its most brutal and bloody war to date, finally overwhelming the Isgari Khelids through sheer attrition. The province of Andoran was established, and by 1750 the city of Augustana in Andoran emerged as a naval capital, supplying nearly all ships for the Taldan navy. In 1893, the second of the ascended gods emerged. The dark god Norgorber passed the test of the Starstone and ascended to godhood, the first to achieve divinity in this manner since Aradin. He fundamentally changed the nature of the Eternal City by establishing the realm of Duskfathom beneath the plane of Axis as his divine realm. In 2009, Taldor launched the Fifth Army of Exploration. The Fifth Army continued the work of the First Army and pushed north through the River Kingdoms, reaching the western border of Iobaria and conquering the nations of Issia and Rossland. To conquer these last, better-defended lands, they used a massive magical siege engine named the Worldbreaker during this campaign. In 2080, Taldor's Sixth Army of Exploration, led by General Arestos Marbaran, conscripted thousands of militiamen and sent them from across the Inner Sea to Garand to take the lands of southern Katapesh from the Kelishites. Arestos was overly ambitious, however, and tried to take the Ndele Gap and thus control trade into the central Mwangi region. They only made it as far as the white city of Nagisa, from which the Alajay elves had withdrawn, before they were ambushed by the Guerrilla King's forces and massacred. The Sixth Army of Exploration holds the ennobled reputation of both having been defeated and of having lost the Worldbreaker. Taldan interest in southern Garand did not wane after this defeat, however. In 2103, a group of Taldan explorers discovered the secret lost city of Osibu in the southern Mwangi expanse. The tall tales of the surviving explorers suggested that there was a magical well that granted eternal life here, prompting a wave of colonization particularly in the western Wangi Islands known as the Shackles. Taldor also continued to expand its holdings in Avestan. In 2133, it launched the 7th Army of Exploration, conquering the provinces of Isgur and Druma. Meanwhile, in the Kelishite satrapies, a growing schism had emerged between the satrap of occupied Osirian and the Padishah Empire, a schism which had in fact been exacerbated by the exile of certain groups of Saronites to other lands. In 2253, the satrap of Osirian was found dead in his palace. For his heirs, this was the last straw, as being a member satrapy of the Kelishite Empire was providing neither the security nor the political or economic value it once had. The satrap's successor named himself an independent sultan, and Osirian became an independent sultanate, ruled by a Kaleshi sultan starting in 2253. The greater empire of Kalesh lacked the resources in that time for a proper reprisal, and the separation happened more or less without further incident. Meanwhile, back in Taldor, although Taldor would retain its dominance of Isgur, its conquest of Druma was relatively short-lived, lasting only a couple of hundred years. As described in more detail in my Druma deep dive video, in 2332 an emerging faction of Palakari Khelids, calling themselves the Calistocracy, arranged for the signing of the Curse Accords, which granted independence for Druma from both Taldan and Dwarven imperialism in that year. In 2361, a Varisian king named Soividia Ustav emerged in the contested lands between Belkzen and the Taldan Empire. Soividia unified all Varisians under him and conquered the land, establishing a new Varisian kingdom called Ustalav, which comprised of 16 mostly self-governed counties. In 2498, the Oath Wars would begin in northwestern Garand, as the churches of Nethys, Norgorber, and Sarenrae vied for dominance. The bloody civil wars would continue for almost 60 years, devastating the region, but ultimately leading to the creation of the nation of Rahadum. By 2500, Taldan colonialists had spread out across the Shackles Islands and established the infamous ports of Blood Cove and Port Peril. In 2555, the Oath Wars ended in Rahadum. Tired of the bloody decades-long Oath Wars, a movement emerged, led by the philosopher Kalim Onaku, which would establish the laws of mortality, the first of which was, "Let no mortal be beholden to a god." State militias began to set fire to the temples and set about banning all religion in the country. This had the effect of pushing the cult of the Red Mantis out of Rahadum and onto the nearby island of Mediogalti, effectively establishing the independent polity of Mediogalti Island. It also pushed out an astronomer-philosopher named Saok, who fled Rahadum 2 years after the establishment of the laws of mortality, and they in turn established the nation of Lirgan on the western coast of Garand in the year 2557. In 2603, more visitors reached the western coast of Garand, this time in the form of the Kaldaru people, who hailed from the western continent of Arcadia across the Arcadian Ocean. They would establish the city of Sengor on the western peninsula known as the Kavalands. In 2606, Taldor finished construction of the impressive Arch of Aradin, a monumentally massive stone bridge that connected the continents of Avestan and Garand, and was dedicated to the god Aradin. Trade began to flourish between the Rahadumi city of Kari and the Taldan city of Corentin, which were located on opposite sides of the bridge. In 2632, the Ayudine elves would return to Golarion, quickly reclaiming their lost kingdom of Keonin from the Taldans, and re-establishing their old capital city of Yadara. Talandia Edasriel was eventually named Queen of Keonin, though an exact date for this event is not given. In 2765, the third ascended god emerged. After a drunken challenge, the mortal adventurer Caden Kalian passed the test of the Starstone and ascended to godhood. In 2802, the elves of Keonin established the settlement of Himbria in the River Kingdoms as a launching point for retaking their ancestral holdings in the Wildwood of Seven Arches. Elven occupation of the northern Himbrian also effectively led to the emergence of the half-elven kingdom of Cordlon over time. In 2920, massive earthquakes devastated the satrapy of Kadira and the Principality of Taldor, killing tens of thousands of people. Social unrest and instability soon followed in both areas, prompting eventually a return to violence along their shared borders. In 3197, the 5 dwarven kingdoms were reunited under the leadership of Kadon the Mighty. He named the new empire Tar Kaderm, and established the new dwarven capital city Jernashal in a mountain called Torag's Crag. In 3203, the wizard Tar Bafon, first killed by Aradin over 2 millennia ago, returned as an undead lich. It took the risen tyrant less than a decade to reconquer most of his old lands, including the territories of the Orcs in the hold of Belkzen and the vast majority of the nation of Ustalav. he established as his capital the city of Adarak in the Virlik Mountains, close to where he was born so long ago. All of the counties of Ustalav fell to his might, except for the southernmost counties, which would become the new independent nation of Melkat. Meanwhile, in Garand, in 3250, a merchant king named Jadai, who grew rich from the vast wealth he had accrued in the drug trade, selling a special narcotic called Pesh, conquered the southern lands of the Sultanate of Osirian and established the independent nation of Katapesh. In 3257, the southern half of the nation of Lirgan rebelled against the wealthier northern part of the nation. The revolution led to the independent country of Yamasa in that year. In 3313, the witch Baba Yaga invaded the eastern Linorm kingdoms of Reymurund and Dyrstor from the crown of the world with an army of winter fae, frost giants, ice trolls, and other arctic creatures. Within 23 days, the so-called Winter War was over, and the Witch Queen had created the realm of Irisen from the fallen Linorm kingdoms. From 3660 to 3672, a 12-year-long period, most of the dragons living in the north of the central principality of Taldor were driven insane by a failed attempt to use an orb of dragon kind. The dragons ravaged much of the heartland of Taldor, especially its central prefecture of Kriris by the World's Edge Mountains. Following these events, the heavy costs of repairing the damage caused to the Taldan heartlands proved to be a source of frustration and discontent among the Empire's outer holdings. Also among the dragons affected during the Dragon Plague was a particularly notable gold dragon named Menkare, whose parents were slain during these events, and who was eventually banished to the Eternal City of Axis. Also in 3672, the tribes of the Sarkorian Kelids finally united under a single king that year, establishing the kingdom of Sarkoris and founding their capital city of Iz from the ruins of an old frost giant city. In 3699, in the central regions of the Mwangi Expanse, the city of Zatramba rose to prominence. It created a powerful union with its sister Savannah tribe of Rastel, and the Zatramba-Rastel union would soon grow to encompass the mighty independent city-state of Kibwe and become a powerful Mwangi polity, with the aims of rivaling the powerful Gurindi nations of the coasts. By 3705, the Union had a civil war between the Zatramba and Rastel tribes, culminating with the Rastel tribe turning to demons to overrun their rivals, an act which ultimately led to destruction for both civilizations. Kibwe survived the conflict, relatively unscathed, and continued being a powerful independent city-state thereafter. In 3725, the lineage of merchant kings established by King Jadai of Katapesh would lose power to the Pact Masters, a quintet of strange aliens called Witch Weirds from a distant world, who were able to conquer the country in only a few days. The Pact Masters have remained the inscrutable masters of Katapesh even to this day. Finally, in 3754, the Empire of Taldor had sufficiently recovered from both the disastrous earthquakes of 2920 and the Dragon Plague of the 3660s, and with relative peace at its southern border, it finally began to look at dangers it faced elsewhere across Avestan. Their greatest concern, naturally, was the growing power of the Whispering Tyrant along their northern border. That year they launched the Shining Crusade, recalling thousands of soldiers from across their realm to march against the Whispering Tyrant's empire of the risen dead. While the Shining Crusade raged on between the Empire of Taldor and the Whispering Tyrant, in 3773 the Gold Dragon Menkare returned to Golarion after more than a century of banishment, exile, and study in Axis. After a brief time spent assisting the Shining Crusade in their war against the Whispering Tyrant, Menkare would establish the island nation of Hermia, an island off the western coast of Avestan, with the goal of constructing there a vision for a perfect civilization. In 3801, the Shining Crusade demonstrated some significant victories. After years of hard fighting, soldiers of the Shining Crusade established a forward position in Ustalav, on the shores of Lake Carthan. The location of their forwardmost fortress would later become the site of the Ustalavic settlement of Vontil. Many of the Shining Crusade victories in this period were due to the reinforcements and aid they had been getting from the dwarves of the Sky Citadel of Kragadan in the Minespin Mountains. The next 20 years would continue to bring positive developments for the Crusaders. In 3816, a promising young captain rose up among the ranks of the Templars of the Shining Crusade. Her name was Iomade. In 3818, Aradin, though he did not intervene directly this time himself, did dispatch his herald Erasni to descend into the mortal world and assist the Crusaders. In 3823, though, there was a major setback. The angel and God's herald Erasni was humiliated and slain by the Whispering Tyrant. In an effort to demoralize his opponents, the Lich threw her broken body back to her knights during the Battle of Three Sorrows. Despite this significant blow to the Shining Crusade, the mortal Iomedae helped rally the Knights of Ozem, and together with the Taldan general Arnisant, she helped push their forces into the heart of the Tyrant's domain, in the mountains of Virlik. A powerful priest of Aradin named Narthok helped create the Great Seal, a powerful ward intended to contain the spirit of the nearly unstoppable undead Lich. In 3827, Iomedae, together with Arnisant and Narthok, successfully bound and imprisoned the Tyrant beneath his fortress of Gallowspire. To ensure that the Whispering Tyrant would never again be resurrected, Iomedae helped found, just southwest of Ustalav, the nation of Lastwall, a country whose sole purpose was to be an ever-watchful and vigilant guardian against the possible return of the Tyrant. Ustalav re-established itself after the Tyrant's defeat, although the Archduchy of Melkat, formerly the southeastern stretch of Ustalav, remained an independent country. By 3828, the Knights of Lastwall had also conquered the former dwarven sky citadel of Kol Dukar, the Orc capital of Ergir. They brought in dwarven masons to shore up its stonework, but they did not return the sky citadel to the dwarves, viewing it as a critical defensive bastion for the region. 5 years later, in 3832, Iomedae would be the fourth and final human to pass the test of the Starstone and join the ranks of the ascended deities. After her ascension, Aradin asked if she would agree to be his herald, replacing the slain angel Erasni as his foremost servant. Erasni's remains had been recovered after the war and had been interred at a sacred place in the new nation of Lastwall. For the next 40 years, the Knights of Lastwall focused on helping protect the Ustalavic people from the lingering threat of the undead. However, in that time, many of the knights began to feel restless without a war to fight. In 3877, a splinter faction of knights took it upon themselves to pick a new enemy, and they chose as their target the Ghost King Geb, who had ruled a nation of the undead for thousands of years now on the eastern coast of Garand. This attempt failed spectacularly, and the Ghost King killed them all. In 3890, the Ghost King Geb enacted his own form of revenge against the Knights of Lastwall. After reanimating the knights that had tried to infiltrate his country as powerful Grave Knights, he ordered the undead knights to return to Lastwall and bring with them the interred remains of Erasni, the former herald of Aradin. Geb took a year and a day to drag Erasni's soul back from the great beyond. Over a period of years, Geb used his subtle yet powerful influence on Erasni, fixating on the doubt and resentment that the Knights of Ozem had planted, eventually corrupting her into a lich with little of her former personality. Having grown bored with the responsibilities of being king, the Ghost King then passed the burden of rulership of the nation of Geb over to Erasni, who had become his new and most favored disciple. In 3967, the old line of kings in Mizali was broken. A new power arose in Mizali called the Council of Moanisa. Mizali would become much like the other major powers of the Mwangi Expanse thereafter, not an imperialist nation, but an independent city-state with a network of connections to the outlying villages. The tombs of the old kings were burned, but one tomb, belonging to a child named Welkenna, went undiscovered. In 3980, touched off by powerful earthquakes, the volcano known as Torag's Crag erupted in the Five Kings Mountains in an event known to history as the Rending. The Tar Kaderm capital of Jernishal was destroyed completely. The dwarven cities became independent city-states, and the land has been simply called the Five Kings Mountains ever since, even though the five dwarven kingdoms for which those mountains were named have not existed for centuries. In 4031, Amalokla, Numeria's first black sovereign, led her army of barbarian tribes to the settlement surrounding the Silver Mount, and conquered it. She first named the settlement Starfall, and essentially formalized the tradition of sovereign rule in Numeria that is still in use to this day. In 4043, the lands of central Belkzen were conquered by a dragon named Kazavon, who helped establish a new kingdom there among the orcs. More details on Kazavon can be found in my Ustalav and Belkzen region deep dive videos. In 4048, the dwarves of Mistholm, following a decade of fruitful trade with the Plane of Fire by way of an artifact called the Well of Many Worlds, accidentally triggered a demonic invasion from the Outer Rifts. The invasion ended when the dwarven lords collapsed their own caverns, destroying the city and trapping both their well and the artifact inside. In 4063, a group of heroes led by a knight of Lastwall named Mandravius defeated the powerful blue dragon Kazavon in his fortress lair of Scarwall. To prevent his resurrection, the dragon was dismembered, and the body parts were each sent into a different far-flung location. This victory had the effect of pushing the lands of Lastwall deeper into orc territory than they had ever been before. A significant orc retaliation against this incursion was imminent, so the Knights of Lastwall constructed a line of towers and walls that they called the Sun Wall to protect their newly acquired lands. In 4079, the armies of Qadira, consisting of more than 40,000 Qadiran and Kelishite soldiers, invaded southern Taldor, beginning the 524-year-long war between the two countries known as the Grand Campaign. The Qadirans record the early successes of this conflict as the Gevran victories, while the Taldans refer to them as the Gevran massacres. In order to more effectively wage war against their southern enemies, the heartland of Taldor began to levy heavier and heavier taxes on their outlying provinces. Finally, in 4081, fed up with the onerous taxes of the heartland, the governor of the Taldan province of Cheliax declared himself independent and put himself on the throne of a new nation, calling himself King Aspects. He would later acquire the epithet King Aspects the Even-Tongued, when in the ensuing decade he would convince the provinces of Isgur, and then in turn the provinces of Andoran and Galt, to join his new empire. While Taldor objected it lacked the military power to oppose him, due to its conflict with Qadira, and Cheliax quickly became the dominant military and cultural power of Avestan. Although King Aspects had managed to seize the imperial holdings of Isgur, Andoran, and Galt, there were a number of other imperial holdings that he desired to keep or reintegrate, but that he could not. In the northeast, the kingdoms of Issia and Rosslyn became independent nations. Between Melkat and Rosslyn, the entire territory fragmented into several independent states, which have been collectively called the River Kingdoms ever since. King Aspects also nominally claimed ownership of the Taldan-colonized islands of the Shackles. In actual fact, those islands quickly devolved into a lawless pirate confederacy, which it remains to this day. By 4083, Qadiran forces had conquered as much of Taldor as the River Porthmos. This was the smallest Taldor had ever been since the first Emperor Taldaris unified the land almost 6,000 years prior. In 4138, frustrated at being unable to bring the unruly pirates of the Shackles in line, Emperor Haliad I of Cheliax chose to bypass them and ordered the founding of the colony of Sargava, which he ignobly named for his favorite horse, on the southwestern coast of Garand. The local Zenge, Bonuat, and Bekyar tribes native to the area were quickly subjugated by the invading colonialists. More details on these people and their culture, as well as the broader history of Sargava, can be found in my Vidrian region deep dive. In 4155, Queen Tashana of Irisen invaded the western region of the realm of the Mammoth Lords in what will become known as the Great Eastern War. The conquered territories were named the new province of Rime-Tusk, and the foundation was laid for its capital of Tashagrod. This expansion lasted for about 5 years, as by 4160, a Desnan Mammoth Lord named Anok waged a victorious war against the Iriseni, firmly establishing the realm of the Mammoth Lord's western border with Irisen. The city of Tashagrod was razed to the ground. In 4237, the Orcs finally had a major breakthrough in their war against the Knights of Lastwall to reclaim their ancestral lands. The defensive fortification known as the Sunwall fell. The Orc capital of Ergir was retaken. The Knights of Lastwall established a new defensive line along the River Esk called Harkist's Blockade. In 4305, the Everwar expansion began. Under the leadership of King Haliad III, the Chelish Empire began an extended period of expansion northwards. They invaded the region that would come to be known as Morthune, and also began an invasion of Nidal in that year as well. The Everwar would last for over a century, ending in 4410, with the conquests of Nidal, Morthune, near Mathis, and parts of southern Varissia as well, where they established their northernmost significant city, the city of Korvosa. The Shoanti that once lived there were pushed up onto the Storval Plateau by the invading Chelish armies. Also in the middle of the Everwar, Cheliax sent forces over the Arch of Arden, and conquered the state of Karajite in northwestern Rahadum, including the vital port of Kari. Cheliax now significantly controlled both sides of the Arch. Meanwhile, in 4307, the Pathfinder Society was founded in Absalom, a society of explorers, adventurers, academics, and cartographers that would soon become one of the major influential factions in the Inner Sea region. Back in Taldor, the ancient nation was still heavily engaged in the Grand Campaign. Taldor launched an invasion of Qadiran territories known as the Heaven Step Offensive, initiated by Grand Prince Janaris III in 4324. And after defeating 6 Qadiran generals in the plains of Peresh, Taldor retook control of much of northern Qadira, including the city of Zimar. In 4329, the nation of Holomog on Garen's eastern border, just south of the Inner Sea region, attempted to invade the nation of Geb from the south. The Ghost King revealed his tremendous power by casting a spell that petrified the invading army, thus leading to the creation of the region known as the Field of Maidens, just south of Geb. In 4423, dwarven emissaries from the city of Yanderhof visited Korvosa for the first time. This helped establish the deep economic partnership between the two cities, which exists even to this day. In 4433, worship of Discari among the Khelids of Sarkoris led to a demonic invasion of Sarkoris. The demonic forces were driven to the shores of the Lake of Mists and Veils by an alliance of Khelids and Mendevians, rallied together by the god Aradin, who made his last recorded appearance on Golarion in that year. Aradin slew the avatar of Discari on the banks of the lake. More details on these events can be found in my World Wound and the Sarkoris Scar region deep dive video. From 4438 to 4512, an independent Druidic kingdom emerged in the Chelish province of Andoran. This was the kingdom of Narvan, established by the Druid king Narvan Feathereyes. Narvan was also notable for having enchanted the hedge maze at the Pathfinder Lodge in the Galtish city of Woodsedge, which has allowed members of the Pathfinder Society to magically move between certain connected lodges across Avestan. 4482 saw the fall of Lastwall's secondary line of defences called Harkist's Blockade. The Knights of Lastwall would establish a third defensive line along the Kestrel River, but this too would fall in 4517, leading to the final borders of the Hold of Belkzen that are still in place today. Interestingly, one human city did remain in Orc lands, the city of True Now, whose residents were too stubborn to leave and who were too well entrenched for the Orcs to displace. The hardy citizens of True Now are now a firmly entrenched part of the Orc holdings. In 4499, the Iobarian warlord Karl the Conqueror, who would later be revealed to be a red dragon in human guise, first emerged on the banks of Needle Lake, and founded what would soon become the capital city of New Stetven. Within the year, Karl and his red dragon allies had taken over the nations of Issia and Rossland. He founded a new country that encompassed both of these former realms and named it Brevoy. In Numeria in 4501, a human survivor of the spaceship crash known as the Reign of Stars woke up and began to work to try to return home to Androffa. Her name was Cedra Imerus, and in support of her goal she founded the Technic League. She would be killed before she could succeed in her task, and the Technic League would evolve into a brutal organization, ruling the nation of Numeria behind the scenes under the guise of supporting the Black Sovereign. They used their mastery of Androffan technology to secure power for themselves for over 2 centuries. In 4558, the Vrisian city of Riddleport was established as an anarchic abode of pirates and brigands. They made their money by preying on the sea trade between the heartland of the Empire of Cheliax in the south and its northern holding of Korvosa. In 4575, in the city of Westcrown in Cheliax, a knight of Aradin named Dadian Rule had his wife murdered by a cult worshipping the demon lord Sifkesh. His son Eris later committed suicide under the cult's influence as well. When Westcrown's government, which had been infiltrated by these cults, blocked Rule from seeking justice, he renounced his faith in Aradin and formed a vigilante group to target the cult. Despite facing resistance and arrests, Rule's group persisted, gaining public support. By 4577, his order defeated the cult and established Citadel Rivad as their permanent home. Rule defiantly adopted the title Hell Knights after followers of Aradin used it to mock him. His actions laid the foundation for the Hell Knight orders to come, and influenced Chelish and broader Innersea history thereafter. See my Hell Knight faction guide for more details on the Hell Knights. In 4588, rogue engineer Ansel Alkenstar discovered the ruins of Dongan Hold while fleeing from charges in Nex. Using his technological skills, he helped build and fortify a new settlement with the aid of the local Ustradi people. He helped introduce new and more efficient forms of agriculture and harnessed the Ustradi River for power. Alkenstar and his followers then located the missing Donguni dwarves from the Sky Citadel in the Darklands and exchanged knowledge with them, gaining the gift of firearms. This development transformed the new city-state, now called Alkenstar, into a powerful, self-reliant polity capable of defending itself from the conflicts between Nex and Geb. Taldor and Kadira's long-standing war, the Grand Campaign, finally ended with a peace treaty and the establishment of a final border along the Jalrun River in 4603. This would, however, not be a permanent end to hostilities. Various border skirmishes and naval conflicts would persist all the way to the present day. The Age of Lost Omens. In 4606, an event occurred called the Death of Prophecy that was felt across the multiverse. Most significant to the Innersea region was the sudden and unexpected death of the god Aradin, who was the patron god of the significant empires of Cheliax and Taldor, as well as the island nation of Absalom, which he helped found. This event also triggered devastating storms across Golarion, including the formation of the Eye of Abendago, the world's most powerful hurricane, which still persists to this day. Massive storm surges from the Eye flooded the western coast of Garand, killing thousands, and destroying the nations of Lirgan and Yamasa, creating the sodden lands in its wake. In Cheliax, storms also obliterated the coastal city of Deng, leaving it haunted by the spirits of the dead. The Arch of Aradin also shattered, dropping huge chunks of the center of the bridge into the sea below. In the far north of Avestan, coinciding with this event, a tear in the fabric of space tore open, creating a massive yawning portal between the material universe and the outer rifts. Legions of demons poured through, leading to the creation of the World Wound. The death of Aradin was felt most keenly in the Empire of Cheliax, which had prophesied that he would return to them in their capital city of Westcrown to usher them into a promised age of peace and prosperity. When all the clerics of the land suddenly lost their power, this catapulted Cheliax into a costly civil war. The civil war lasted for 34 years, ending with the Thrune ascendancy and the crowning of Abigail Thrune I in 4640. Thrune victory in the Chelish Civil War fundamentally changed the empire forever after, as the House of Thrune were Diabolists, and they made worship of Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell, the new official state religion throughout their empire. Under their rule, the Hell Knights grew significantly in power and became more brazen and more brutal. Although officially Cheliax would establish a separation of church and state, the fact that the new ruling monarchy was so closely tied to the Asmodean faith meant that the new Cheliax was a monarchy with heavy theocratic leanings, if not an outright theocracy. Freedom of religion was generally preserved, as citizens were not obliged to worship Asmodeus, but it was highly encouraged, and any faiths considered to be destabilizing, such as the worship of Calistria, for example, were banned outright. Despite the Thrune victory in the Civil War, the thrice-cursed house was not able to preserve its empire in its entirety. In order to win the war, they had to promise the Shadow Lords of Nidal their country back. Nidal went back to being an independent sovereign state, once again dedicated to Zon Kuthon, the Midnight Lord. The Nidalese refer to the 300-year period they had under Aradinite Chelish rule as the Shadow Break, and many Nidalese revolutionaries would love to see a return to that time period. Also during the Civil War, the nation of Malthun separated from Cheliax. This occurred in 4632, only 8 years before the end of the war. At that time, Malthun comprised all the lands from Belkzen and Lastwall to the Menador Mountains. Cut off from the Chelish mainland, the city of Korvosa became an independent city-state the following year. Naturally, the Chelish Civil War had had the effect of dividing Chelish nationals across the empire, including the remote reaches of Korvosa. In fact, only 2 years into the war, in 4608, thousands of Korvosans left the city due to their dissatisfaction with Cheliax's continued influence in Korvosa, and they relocated to the new emerging city of Magnimar. Settling down with the native Varisian peoples of the realm, these exiles transformed Magnimar very quickly into the second largest city-state in the region after Korvosa itself. The 4 large city-states of Korvosa, Magnimar, Riddleport, and the ancient city of Kermaga, effectively formed a new confederacy of sorts, broadly called Varisia. With the loss of Malthun, Nidal, and Korvosa, Cheliax had effectively lost access to the vital trade routes in the Encarthan circuit. It became vital to them that they remained in control of the province of Isgur, and so they offered the governor of Isgur a position of stewardship, formalizing Isgur's current state as an independently governed protectorate of Cheliax's, a status which it retains to this day. Finally, there was one more significant loss to the Chelish Empire, and that was the loss of its colony on the western coast of Garand. After the Chelish War, Sargava, which had supported House Thrune's main opposition, House Davian, declared itself an independent colonial state. They began to pay heavy protection fees to the Pirates of the Shackles, so as to have a force that might resist Chelish reprisal. The Pirates of the Shackles needed the funds too, as starting in 4607, the year after the death of Prophecy, the Hurricane King, High Chair of the Free Captains' Council, that functioned as the de facto government of the Pirate Islands, began to wage a costly war with the Mbeke dwarves of Cloudspire. The first of these Corsair wars would last from 4607 to 4611. In 4608, Taldor launched a final and unexpected 8th Army of Exploration under General Orpheria Amanandar, which was deployed by fleet to colonize lands afar. They would arrive in Tianxia and establish a settlement there called New Opara. More details on this remote colony can be found in my Tianxia overview guide. In 4609, after 3,000 years of foreign rule, Pharaonic rule was restored to Osirian, when Prince Kemet I overthrew the Kelishite Sultan and claimed the throne. The pharaoh was said to have had a lineage dating back to the ancient pharaohs of old. His son, Kemet II, succeeded him, followed by the current ruler, Kemet III. Under Kemet III's rule, parts of Osirian were open to foreign treasure hunters and researchers for the first time. Meanwhile, in Sargava, the pirate protection payments were growing costly, and in 4610, a Sargavan army made the mistake of marching east to try and take the wealthy city-state of Mazali. By threatening the city, this army inadvertently prompted the resurrection of the child mummy Walkenna. Returned to life by ancient oaths, and brought back in a unique state of partial divinity, the risen child mummy used his divine powers to incinerate the Sargavan forces. then dissolved the ruling Wanisa Council and declared himself God King of Mizali. This began a series of costly skirmishes between Mizali and Sargava, which further crippled the colonial Sargavan economy and nation. In 4618, as the Chelish civil war continued to rage in southern Avestan, the Church of Iomedae emerged in other parts of the world, especially in Lastwall, as the natural successor to Ardnite worship. They began to call her the Inheritor, and many Ardnite priests converted to her faith. The Church of Iomedae began preparation for the First Mendevian Crusade, an effort to stem the flood of demons spilling out from the world wound in the north. In 4620, the River Kingdom of Daggermark hosted the first ever summit of the Outlaw Council. The council was comprised of kings and overlords from across the River Kingdoms, including the formerly Ustalavic country of Melkat, thus establishing the River Kingdoms as a kind of allied confederacy of nations. They also codified the River Freedoms, a set of values by which all the River Kingdoms should generally adhere to. Later that same year, Alkenstar's gunworks were established, and the city became renowned for its firearms, supplying these rare and costly weapons to nations across the Inner Sea. In 4628, the First Mendevian Crusade had a significant victory, establishing the fortress city of Dresden on the edge of the world wound. The First Crusade formally came to an end a couple of years after this, in 4630. A second Mendevian Crusade would last from 4638 to 4645, a third from 4665 to 4668, a fourth from 4692 to 4707, and a fifth from 4714 to 4718. More details on the events of each of these major military campaigns can be found in my World Wound Deep Dive video. Meanwhile, from 4646 to 4655, the Freedom War, a revolutionary war fought between the northern rebels of Malthun and their southern lords, sparked by an attack on the northern capital of Tamran, ultimately led to the separation and independence of the nation of Nirmathas from the larger southern state of Malthun. More details on this conflict can be found in my Malthun and Nirmathas region deep dive video. In 4661, the so-called living god Razmir ascended to power in Melkat, taking that country for himself. He established the nation of Razmiran and withdrew from the confederacy of the River Kingdoms. More details on the nation of Razmiran can be found in my Razmiran region deep dive video. In 4662, the Galtan philosopher Darl Ubanik wrote the treatise On Government, a denunciation of the new Chelish government and a cataloguing of their many betrayals. This prompted the Red Revolution in Galt in 4667 and ultimately led to Galtish independence that year. 2 years later, Andoran followed suit and had their own revolutionary war in 4669. More details about the Andorran and Galtish revolutions can be found in my Andoran and Galt region deep dive videos respectively. One pertinent detail is that in 4672, Darl's revolutionary government in Galt was overthrown. His collaborators were all killed by special magical guillotines called Final Blades that trapped the souls of their victims, and Darl himself fled into hiding in Andoran. After these events, Andoran continued to grow into a regional power, establishing itself as the region's first democratic republic. While in Galt, under the influence of a maniacal murder cult known as the Grey Gardeners, the nation continued to descend into madness and ruin, as each new ruling government was wiped out by new sets of counter-revolutionaries. For many decades after this, thousands of Galtish exiles, especially anyone of noble descent, fled the country to live as refugees in other parts of the Inner Sea. Also, starting in 4669, a 20-year-long naval conflict between Cheliax and Andoran occurred, which only ended in 4689 when the Andorran navy managed to sink 3 warships, including a flagship, off the coast of West Crown. As part of this struggle, starting in 4679, both Cheliax and Andoran established settlements on Arcadia across the Arcadian Ocean at a place called the Grinding Coast. In 4674, Prince Adward Ordranti III ascended the throne of the Principality of Ustalav after his older brother died, leaving behind no heirs. Prince Ordranti III remains the High Lord of Ustalav to this day. In 4680, the pirate Gaston Cromarky became the overlord of the Vrisian city of Riddleport, a title which he remarkably still holds 45 years later to this day. Not far away, in 4682, Queen Domina Arabasti of Corvosa, in an attempt to strengthen the military power of her city, courted the Hell Knights of Cheliax. She eventually convinced members of the Order of the Nail to relocate to Vrisia, promising a rich endowment and a keep of their own, Citadel Vraid. More details on Citadel Vraid and the Vrisian Order of Hell Knights can be found in my Hell Knights faction guide. In 4683, the first open conflict between the nations of Razmiran and the elven nation of Keonin broke out. Keonin built the Berm, a miles-long stand of semi-sentient trees that defend Keonin's northern border with Razmiran along the Glass River. In the next few decades, some more important recent rulers would come to power. In 4685, Ingemundr the Unruly ascended to power as the Linorm king of Broken Bay. In 4688, Kevoth Kul, the current ruling Black Sovereign of Numeria, rose to power. In 4689, the demon Yalak Vor of the World Wound conquered the Grey Dwarf-occupied sky citadel of Yormer Dun. In 4692, warlord Grask Uldeth of the Empty Hand tribe rose to power in the hold of Belkzen, and significantly took strides to open up the Orc hold to trade with human nations. He even allowed human settlement of a new town called Freedom Town, close to the borders with Ustalav and Lastwall, to establish itself in 4694. Through these efforts, Warlord Uldeth encouraged greater participation of the Orcs of Belkzen with regional trade and politics, marking him as a unique leader among the Orcs. Also in 4694, a man named Keldor ascended to the position of High Prophet of the Calistocracy, becoming the supreme leader of the nation of Druma. In Western Garin, the Second Corsair Wars were being fought between the Pirates of the Shackles and the Mbeke Dwarves, lasting from 4695 to 4699. While this was going on in Isgir, from 4697 to 4701, the Goblin Blood Wars would ravage the land. More details on the Goblin Blood War can be found in my Isgir region deep dive video. Isgir has never truly recovered from these events. Meanwhile, in 4699, King Regent Noleski Sertova ascended to power in Brevoy, and in 4700 his exalted eminence Zerbistes II, defender of the Zo Mountains and satrap of glorious Kathir, ascended to power in Kadira. In 4702, a stone giant warlord named Mokmurian from the Iron Peaks of Varissia activated a Thessalonian rune well, bringing Karzug, the long-sleeping rune lord of greed, back into the world. This would set off a sequence of events that would ultimately lead to the foundations of New Thassalon in the future. In 4704, White Estrid defeated the Linorm Boiltongue by recruiting it to serve her instead of killing it, and becoming the Linorm Queen of the Ironbound Islands. In 4706, Marquin Teldas was named Imperial Governor of Malthun, a title which he still holds to this day as well, and Thakur Karswan acquired the title of Thakur or High Lord of Jalmaray Island. The Events of Pathfinder, First Edition. From here on out, there will be spoilers for various First Edition Pathfinder adventure paths, as I detail how those adventures have affected the Pathfinder world. I'm generally not including in my summary here details from the Pathfinder Society or Pathfinder Standalone Module Adventure Series because they are generally too numerous. Some of the consequences of those events are, however, called out as asides. In 4707, the Rise of the Rune Lords took place. In this adventure, the awakened Rune Lord Karzug attempted to conquer Varissia, but he was thwarted by a band of adventurers. In 4708, the Curse of the Crimson Throne took place. After succeeding her husband as Queen of the Crimson Throne, Queen Iliosa Arabasti I threatened to resurrect the draconic conqueror Kazavon, who once controlled vast stretches of northern Varissia and the hold of Belkzen. She was slain by adventurers and succeeded as Queen of Korvosa by Cressida Croft, former Field Marshal of the Korvosan Guard. In 4709, Second Darkness occurred. The corrupted houses of the Dark Hells of the Darkland city of Zirnakainen plotted to bring about a second age of darkness to claim power in the world above. Heroes from the surface world ventured into the deepest parts of the Darklands to dismantle their plot. Later that year, the Legacy of Fire occurred. In the desert realm of Katapesh, a potent Ifriti warlord threatened to resurrect a long-dead spawn of Rovagug, a titanic behemoth of death and terror, but his efforts too were stopped by a plucky band of adventurers. Also in the year 4709, her infernal magistrix Queen Abigail II of the thrice-damned House of Thrun became the sixth ruler to wear the crown of diabolical Cheliax since her great-grandmother Abigail Thrun I. In the neighbouring city of Isgir, Hedven VI ascended to the position of Steward of Isgir. In 4710, Council of Thieves occurred. As the various devils of hell vied for influence with Asmodeus, the Prince of the Damned, many tried to use his chosen nation of Cheliax to further their plans. Seducing a devil-blooded Nephilim named Ecardian Drovenge, the Archdevil Mammon, the Devil of Greed, aimed to gain control of Westcrown. Ecardian and the Archdevil's plots were foiled by local heroes. Later that year, Kingmaker took place. In the anarchic river kingdoms, anyone who could claim a land for themselves could build a kingdom. After ousting the bandit king of the Stolen Lands, a group of ambitious adventurers established a new kingdom for themselves, occupying the land between Brevoy and the rest of the kingdoms. Some later sources have named this new nation as Narland and its capital as Shrikewall. In 4711, Serpent's Skull occurred. A group of adventurers arrived in colonial Sargava seeking the lost Aslanti city of Savanth Yi. In so doing, they discovered a plot by the Serpent folk to resurrect their lost god Idursius, who was slain by an Aslanti hero at the dawn of the Age of Legend. Uncovering and preventing these schemes brought these heroes into conflict with the tyrant of the Mwangi jungle, the legendary Gorilla King. By slaying the Gorilla King, these heroes brought about significant change to the region. Later that year, Carrion Crown occurred. The necromantic cult known as the Whispering Way sought to bring back the Whispering Tyrant, but their plot was uncovered and thwarted by heroes in Ustalav. The Whispering Tyrant remained bound in Gallowspire, for now. Unrelated to these events, but also in 4711, Freyr Darkwine, who was the Castellan of Trollheim in the Linorm kingdoms and commander of the Black Ravens military organization, came to be recognized as the de facto ruler of the region of Hagreach, although he is not a true Linorm king on account of not having killed a Linorm. In 4712, Jade Regent took place. An unassuming tavern owner in the Verisian town of Sandpoint discovered her birthright was to rule one of the ancient dragon empires of Tianxia, the Empire of Minkai. In a journey that would take the heroes across the world of Galarian, Empress Ameiko Amaterasu was eventually crowned as the new Empress of Minkai. See my Tianxia overview guide for more details on these events. Later that year, Skull and Shackles occurred. The thrice-cursed Empire of Cheliax launched a fleet of ships to retake territories they perceived as theirs on the western coast of Garand, including the Shackles and Sargava. A new member of the Free Captains Council helped organize the pirates to defend their islands and defeat the Chelish Admiralty. In the course of these events, the old Hurricane King, Kurdak Bonefist, was slain, and the new Hurricane Queen, Tessa Fairwind, ascended to the head of the Free Captains Council. In 4713, the Runelord saga continued with Shattered Star, specifically focusing on the story of Zin, the founder of the ancient empire of Thassalon, and one of his greatest enemies, the Algolthu master Ogunthan. In the course of these events, the heroes learned that almost all of the lost Runelords, as arcanists of unfathomable power, had discovered some way of preserving themselves against the destruction of Earthfall. Now, with the artifact called the Sahedron Rune, Varisia would be better prepared to face them. By the end of this adventure, Lord Mayor Sabria Kalmaram succeeded Lord Mayor Haldmir Groberas as the High Lady of Magnamar. Later that year, the Reign of Winter occurred. Instead of adhering to the rule of 100 years, the Witch Queen Elvana of Irisen clung to power. Furthermore, the winters of Irisen began to spread to nearby lands. A group of heroes not only ventured into Irisen, but using powerful magics were transported to the distant planet of Earth, the country of Russia, where Irisen's founder, the Witch Queen Baba Yaga, herself originally hailed from. They returned from Earth with a proposed heir to the Witch Queen monarchy of Irisen, the young Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova, who it turns out was also a descendant of Baba Yaga herself. She was crowned Queen Anastasia of Irisen later that year, marking the only documented Earthborn human to be currently influencing affairs in Galarian. Then in 4714, Wrath of the Righteous occurred. Mendevian Queen Gulfrey led the invasion directly into the Worldwound, confronting and defeating the demon lord Discari, Lord of Locusts. The Fifth Mendevian Crusade finally came to an end. The breach to the Outer Rifts was closed. Now the land once called the Worldwound is known as the Sarkoris Scar, but it remains dangerous, as demons can still be found scattered across the land. The Sarkorian Kelids are slowly returning to the land, with Gundrun being their most significant city. In Mendev, Chancellor Irahai now leads the provisional civilian government. For her part, Queen Gallfrey passed beyond the mortal world, and has been named the new herald of the goddess Iomade as a post-mortal angel. Although published in 2014, this adventure is assumed to take place over a 4-year period, effectively concluding in 4718. Also in 4714, Mummy's Mask occurred. The new Osirian policy of allowing adventurers to explore their ancient monuments awakened a powerful mummy, Hakotep I, the Sky Pharaoh, who once constructed a great flying pyramid to compete with the sky cities of the Shori Empire. Although the mummy was defeated, these events have caused Ruby Prince Kemet III, the current pharaoh of Assyrian, to significantly tighten restrictions around foreign activity in his country. In 4715, Iron Gods took place. In Numeria, powerful artificial intelligences that came with the starship Divinity came close to acquiring a spark of divinity. The age of the Iron Gods could soon be upon the world. However, with the aid of an AI called Cassandali, heroes thwarted the rise of these Iron Gods. In the course of these events, the ruling Technic League were exposed for having poisoned and manipulated the Black Sovereign Kevoth Kul. After regaining his senses, Kevoth Kul cast out the Technic League from Numeria. Additionally, Cassandali ascended to divinity, the only surviving Iron God and patron goddess to androids, constructs, and science the world over. Later that year, Giant Slayer occurred. A storm giant warlord named Volstis, the Storm Tyrant, acquired an orb of dragon kind. With dragons now bending to his will, he began gathering an army of giants from across western Avestan, first to bring the orc hordes of Belkzen under his banner, then to conquer all the neighboring realms. A group of heroes from the human town of Trunau were the only thing able to stand in his way, dismantling his plans and bringing peace back to the Mindspin Mountains. Towards the end of these events, the much-loved orc warlord of Belkzen, Grask Uldeth, was assassinated. He was replaced by one of his key advisors, Ardax the White-Haired, who has proven himself a capable successor, particularly in later opposing the return of the Whispering Tyrant. More details on this are covered in my Belkzen region deep dive video. Unrelated to either of these events, in 4715, a revolution occurred in Sargava. The colonial Sargavan government was overthrown, and the new nation of Vidrian was born. The Vidric Revolution is described in more detail in my Vidrian region deep dive video. Revolutionary hero Shamali Mannix would go on to help found the Firebrands faction, described in more detail in my Firebrands faction guide. In 4716, Hell's Rebels and Hell's Vengeance occurred. These two Cheliax adventures are supposed to have occurred contemporaneously. In the south of the country, the Glorious Reclamation, an order of knights dedicated to Iomade, threatened to bring revolution to the city of Westcrown, which had been feeling ready for a change since the events of Council of Thieves some years earlier. However, a group of nefarious troubleshooters loyal to House Thrune shut down the Glorious Reclamation and preserved Chelish power in the south. While these troubles in Westcrown distracted the greatest of Cheliax's agents, in the north of the country another quiet revolution was underway, ready to take the empire of Cheliax by surprise. In the city of Kintargo, the brave adventuring company called the Silver Ravens successfully staged a revolution in the province of Ravenel, separating from Cheliax and forming their own independent nation on the other side of the Menador Mountains. Domina Gilia Bainalis, formerly Mayor Gilia Bainalis, became the sovereign of the new state. Another event to closely follow Hell's Rebels and Hell's Vengeance was the Rahadumi conquest of the city of Kari, denying Chelish ownership of both sides of the Hesperith Strait. Meanwhile, also in that year, Andira Murasek was elected to the position of Supreme Elect of Andoran, narrowly winning her first election. She has successfully won 2 more elections and remains the current Supreme Elect. In 4717, strange eons took place in which a group of heroes prevented the cult of the Yellow Sign, worshippers of a powerful god of the Dark Tapestry called the King in Yellow, from expanding its influence across the world of Galarian. Later that year, the Iron Fang invasion took place. A hobgoblin survivor of the Goblin Blood Wars in Isger, named Dezersi, rallied a number of hobgoblin mercenaries to form a mercenary company, which in turn became an army. Eventually, that army besieged the kingdoms of Nermathis and Malthun, and although her expansionist ambitions were halted by a group of heroes, she was able to establish a permanent new hobgoblin nation in the region, the nation of Oprak, capitaled in Hunthul. Azersi's meteoric rise to power was also due to her possession of an artifact from the elemental plane of Earth that allowed her to navigate the Stone Roads, extra-dimensional roadways connecting Galarian and the elemental plane. Through these roads, Azersi has brokered alliances with the hobgoblins of the Bandu Hills in the Mwangi Expanse, the Darklands hobgoblin nation of Raklo, and the surface hobgoblin nation of Kaoling in Tianxia. With these broad-reaching trading partners, Azersi's power is growing by the year. She has also sought alliances with the traditionally inwards-looking nations of the Inner Sea, including Nidal, Belkzen, Resmiran, and various other societies of the Darklands as well. Also in 4717, and unrelated to these adventure paths, survivors of the Lyrgeni diaspora, who had been moving east across the Mwangi Expanse, discovered the sealed city of Jaha. Finding it to be uninhabited, they settled in the city. More details on the city of Jaha can be found in my Sodden Lands deep dive video. In 4718, ruins of Aslant took place. Some of the Algolthu masters, who once brought about the destruction of old Aslant, resurfaced, but thankfully their new plans for global domination were undone by a group of intrepid explorers. Also in that year, the War for the Crown took place in Taldor. Grand Prince Stavian III died after, in a fit of madness, he attempted to wipe out his own senate. The line of succession was not clear, but 2 leading candidates emerged for the position of Grand Prince, Stavian's daughter Eutropia and Stavian's chief general, Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius. Thanks to the intervention of a group of heroes, the malicious general's bid for the crown was thwarted, and the relatively benevolent Empress Eutropia succeeded the throne of Taldor. Finally, unrelated to these adventures in the Islands of the Shackles, the Third Corsair War with the Mbeke dwarves began in 4718. By all accounts, this remains an active conflict to this day. Finally, 4719 saw the last 2 first edition adventure paths. In Return of the Runelords, the culmination of the Runelord saga occurred. Chief among these dangerous foes was Runelord Alasnis, the Runelord of Wrath. The only way to defeat her was for a group of heroes to ally with the most unlikely of partners, Runelord Sorshan, the Runelord of Lust. The consequences of this adventure were far-reaching and dramatic. By the end of this epic adventure, no fewer than 2 Runelords had returned to Golarion, and they created a new combined kingdom in the northern half of Varissia called New Thassalon. The eastern half, capitalled in Zin-Shalast, was Sorshan's realm of Eurythnia. The western half, capitalled in Zin-Edasaril, was the realm of Edasaril, the domain of Belimarius, the Runelord of Envy, whom the heroes inadvertently brought back with them as well. Belimarius has since conquered stretches of the Ironbound archipelago, as well as laid claim to the Velashu uplands and the traditionally elven-controlled Mirani forest. She also slew Opier Eightfingers, the Linorm king of Southmoor, who has since been replaced by King Ostog the Unslain. More details on New Thassalon and the surviving Runelords can be found in Part 2 of my Varissia and New Thassalon region deep dive video. Then in Tyrant's Grasp, the very last adventure of 4719, somehow Tar-Baphon returned, laying waste to the nation of Lastwall and creating in its place the horrifying Gravelands. In his rage at not being able to slay Aradin, the god who first laid him low, Tar-Baphon proceeded to do the next best thing, and threatened Absalom itself, the city created by the fallen deity. However, despite his immeasurable power, a group of heroes, with the aid of Watcher Overlord Ulthun II, the last lord of Lastwall, were able to thwart his ambitions in Absalom, creating, at the site of their final confrontation, a dreadful scar on the land. The final magical explosion wrenched the tyrant's right hand from his wrist and embedded it within the land itself. This blighted realm is now called the Tyrant's Grasp. Among the various other impacts that Tyrant's Grasp had to the world, one other significant one was that Arasni, who had currently been serving as the Queen of Geb, abdicated her position and service to the Ghost King, getting involved directly in the fight against the Whispering Tyrant. Since that time, the Ghost King himself has had to reluctantly take over rulership of Geb once again. Unrelated to all of this, in 4719, the Linorm king Nanku rose to power in Icemark, while Thera Asheyes succeeded her father Sven Bloodeagle as the Linorm queen of the Thanelands. The events of Pathfinder 2nd edition. Starting in 4720, Paizo Publishing began publishing adventures for its 2nd edition of the game. Following here is a summary of some of the major events that have occurred between 4720 and 4725. Spoilers for some of those adventures may follow. In 4720, in Age of Ashes, an investigation into the network of elven gates called the Ayudara led to 2 significant outcomes. The first was the thwarting of the return of the apocalyptic dragon god Dahak, and the second being either the rescue or the killing of Menkare, the gold dragon that founded the island nation of Hermia. Regardless, it is likely that the events of Age of Ashes radically changed the nation of Hermia, and Menkare, if he remains alive, has likely handed over power on the island over to its human citizens. Later that year, in Extinction Curse, a circus troupe uncovered the secret behind the fading magic of the Aeon Towers that made the rocky island so fertile. In the course of this adventure, they restored power to the Aeon Towers and thereby saved life across the Kortos Isles. Also in 4720, amid the hustle and bustle of the world-famous Centennial Radiant Festival, the guards of the new Edgewatch Precinct had to take down a who's who of Absalom's most nefarious criminals. After a string of seemingly unrelated crimes was revealed as part of a much larger criminal plot, the members of one select squad had to put their badges on the line to prevent the city from falling into chaos. In 4721, near the town of Otari, the Abomination Vaults were discovered, an epic dungeon full of nasty beasties. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the Ruby Phoenix tournament of Tianxia led to some dramatic changes to the kingdom of Goka. Also in 4721, the Strength of Thousands took place. Over the course of their academic career, a group of heroes rose from humble students to become teachers in their own right, ultimately holding the fate of the Magambia Magic Academy in their hands. Finally, in 4721, the Night of the Grey Death standalone Pathfinder adventure took place in Galt. After 100 years of bloody revolution, the Grey Gardeners were defeated. First Citizen Camelia Dranik succeeded the xenophobic First Citizen Karen Goss as the chairwoman of the People's Council. She is now in the process of repairing her country. More details on Galt can be found in my Galt region deep dive. Meanwhile, also in 4721, Forest Marshal Wesleyan Garvik was elected to a 4-year term as the ruler of the nation of Nir Mathis. He will be coming up for election again in 4725. In 4722, Quest for the Frozen Flame occurred. The Mammoth Lord, following of the Broken Tusk, had to defend the important Mammoth Lord city of Hillcross in the Tusk Mountains from an army of frost giants. Also in that year, Outlaws of Alkenstar saw a ragtag band of gunslinging outlaws get their hands dirty in the greasy alleyways and whiskey-soaked saloons of Alkenstar, the city of smog, and the Bloodlord's Adventure Path, which, now that the Ghost King was back in charge of the undead nation of Geb, saw a new group of undead heroes rise to prominence in that unique and dangerous country. In 4723, Gatewalkers took adventurers from the river kingdom of Seven Arches to the demon-ravaged Sarkoris Scar to Ustalav and ultimately to the Crown of the World to absolve themselves of a powerful curse. Another group of adventurers chased powerful magical cards scattered across the world in the adventure Stolen Fate. Finally that year, a group of adventurers had to save the most ancient dwarven city of all, the city of Highhelm, in the adventure The Sky King's Tomb. The year that has just passed is 4724. Season of Ghosts saw adventurers explore Tianxia's haunted land of Shenmen. Seven Dooms for Sandpoint saw the return of the Sandpoint Devil, and many more terrors besides in the sleepy Magnamari town of Sandpoint. And finally, Wardens of Wildwood saw the millennia-long renewal of the Verduran Treaty between the Principality of Taldor and the Wildwood Lodge of Druids get interrupted, which has had significant consequences for all the denizens of the Verduran Forest and for the nearby nations of Taldor and Andoran. A final significant second edition adventure is the standalone adventure Pray for Death. In this adventure, the god Gorum is dramatically killed. While distracted, the god Achekek emerged from the waters of the clashing shore, ambushed Gorum, and killed him. Achekek's killing blow pierced Gorum's armor from behind. Before tearing him asunder, Gorum's destroyed armor exploded, casting shrapnel bearing traces of his divinity across reality and onto every realm of the universe where Gorum was worshipped, including Galarian. This has been the instigation of an event that will likely last through much of the coming year, known as the God's Reign. This brings us to 4725, the current year of the Pathfinder world. As for how the God's Reign and the death of Gorum will affect Galarian in the years to come, only time will tell.